Most of us would love to move into a big, spacious, comfortable mansion and stay there forever. But there are plenty of cases where the lucky inhabitants don't stick around and nobody moves in to take their place. Here are some of the strangest cases of abandoned mansions you'll ever hear. If you need a little extra stretching room and have tons upon tons of cash to throw around, Lynnewood Hall may be your dream home. This Pennsylvania palace, built between 1897 and 1900, houses an incredible 110 rooms. Along with 55 bedrooms, many of those rooms were used to house an art gallery, as the inhabitant was a super-rich industrialist and art collector named Peter Widener. As you might expect, a 110-room monolith never ran cheap. It cost the equivalent of $200 million in today's money to build, and it's still incredibly valuable. Last time this home was on the market, it sold for around $11 million, despite it falling into considerable disrepair over the decades. If its current owner wishes to live in it as Gilded Age fat cats like Peter Widener did, they'll likely have to fork over roughly $40 million for repairs. No word on whether they've done that or are planning to. Perhaps you are the mega millionaire who can make it happen. The Italian Renaissance Revival mansion called Swannanoa, sitting comfortably in Virginia, has had quite the life. That is, if you can call virtual dormancy as a living facility since 1988 to be living. Railroad tycoon James Dooley loved his wife so much he decided to have a mansion built for her. In 1912, he did just that. At the time, it was the most advanced house you could think of, made out of Georgian marble and featuring 52 rooms, terrace gardens, and gold pipes for plumbing. Absolutely everything about it screamed luxury. What's more, it even had private electricity, something unheard of for a home at that time. The only real way to score private electricity in that era was to build your own power plant right in your backyard. Who could possibly be rich enough to do such a thing? James Dooley, that's who. Dooley died in 1924, and his wife followed 2 years later. The mansion took on several identities over the decades following. For a while, the Valley Corporation owned and operated it as a country club, until leasing it in 1948 to a scientist named Walter Bowman Russell and his wife Lau. The pair operated it as both a museum and a living space, until Russell ceased to be in 1963. Lau held on until 1988, and the mansion all but died with her. Nobody has actually lived there since, though it is open for the occasional wedding or other private event. That said, you may want to look elsewhere. Reports say the mansion is in bad shape and rapidly deteriorating from decades of neglect. And now, a ghost story. The Villa de Vecchi, or Red House, was a triple-decker mansion built sometime in the 1850s. An Italian count named Felix de Vecchi wanted a top-of-the-line summer home, and so he built one. For the time, it was one of the best and most luxurious mansions in the country. It featured heat, indoor plumbing, and even an outdoor fountain. Plus, it looks like one of Dr. Wildey's skull castles, which is an instant win for any building. However, by 1862, the Red House began to earn its true nickname, Ghost House. That year, the Count came home to find his wife murdered and daughter missing. He never found his daughter, and in less than a year, the grief caused him to take his own life. His brother assumed control of the mansion, and the family lived there until around World War II. Ownership changed hands several times in the next couple decades, but by the 60s, it had been completely abandoned. That is, unless you believe in ghosts and believe that they count as residents. Some who have come near the Red House at night insist that its grand piano is still being played to this day, and the mansion's specter is the pianist. Further evidence of the mansion's supernatural nature came in 2002. That year, an avalanche destroyed many of the homes in the area. The ghost house? It survived, and still stands to this day. If you've ever watched that show Life Without People and wondered what it would be like to live in a rotted home overtaken by Mother Nature's finest shrubbery, the McNeal Mansion in New Jersey is for you. In 1894, industrialist Andrew McNeal built himself a nice big Victorian mansion, some 500 feet away from the pike and foundry plant that he founded. At the time, it was the single largest private house in the country, with over 10,000 square feet for McNeal to play in. It even contained a second, smaller house, simply for managing and maintaining McNeal's horse-drawn carriages. Yes, even his garage was nicer than your house. Just a few years later, however, a large company called US Pipe bought McNeal out. They also turned his mansion into a company headquarters, adding 14,000 more square feet in the process. They used the building until 1974, when they left town completely and sold the gorgeous mansion to absolutely nobody. It's been completely neglected and rotting from the inside ever since. A fire in 2001 simply hastened the destruction, as the inside is now almost completely gutted and charred. Some companies would like to repair it, except for the small issue of it costing roughly $10 million to do so. As a result, the McNeal Mansion remains the skeleton of a once historic living space, and will likely remain that way until somebody buys it, totals it, and builds a Starbucks in its place. On a small island in Cape Vincent, New York, very close to Canada, stands a veritable castle that can be yours for under $500,000. Of course, you're probably going to have to spend millions to fix the place up, as it's completely crumbling from the inside out, but that's just a small detail. The mansion was built in 1895 as the new vacation spot for a businessman named William Wyckoff. He had made a small fortune selling a hot new invention called the typewriter, but all that money didn't save him from what appears to be a cursed home. On the very first night he moved in, Wyckoff suffered a heart attack and died. His son took over, but the typewriter money appears to have been the next casualty, because by 1927 he had moved clean out of the castle. Nobody has lived there since. In the nearly 100 years since, the palace has fallen into complete and utter dilapidation. The foundation and wooden frames have rotted and deteriorated, the walls are crumbling, contractors took the doors and windows for themselves during World War II, and the only way to reach the place is by boat. As a result, some contracting experts estimate that if you want to fix this place up and make it your own, it would likely cost over $10 million. Sadly, unlike its original owner, don't expect to make that money selling typewriters. Who doesn't love the sight of a spooky old Gothic castle overlooking the hills of some distant land? It's such a shame that such mansions don't really exist anymore. Except they do. Well, a couple of them anyway. The Cambusnethan House in North Lanarkshire, Scotland is perhaps the most beautiful, along with one of the few remaining in the country. Originally a mere tower house, the full castle was built in 1819 after the original house burned down years prior. The noble Lockhart family from Castle Hill used it as their home, at least for a while. By the turn of the century, living in a stone-cold Gothic castle was going out of style, and many of them wound up on the demolition block. The Cambusnethan House survives, though not in tip-top shape. By 1967, Scotland was finally ready to level this castle as well, at least until a man named Ronald Wilson bought it up. A decade later, he decided to turn it into a medieval restaurant, and the castle was used for themed banquets for years after. However, a fire in the 1980s damaged the castle significantly. Wilson didn't keep up with the repairs, and the old fortress began to fall into complete disarray. For the next couple decades, he and future owners attempted to get permission to turn the castle into a bunch of fancy Gothic apartments. However, age plus fire damage meant his vision never came to fruition, and now the Cambusnethan House is considered a critical risk, according to Scotland's Buildings at Risk Register. At this rate, even Dracula would not want to live in this castle. He may be undead, but he's not unsafe. This might be the sleaziest abandoned mansion story you'll ever hear. The Swingers Tiki Palace of Chattanooga, Tennessee is the unofficial name of a 5,600 square foot mansion built by Billy Hull in 1972. Hull was a strip club tycoon who envisioned the home with exactly one goal in mind: endless partying and debauchery. The palace, as a result, was the ultimate bachelor pad. It featured several open bars, a sauna, mirrored cabinets, closed-circuit television, a jacuzzi big enough for 12 people, and marble covering every single floor and ceiling. But the biggest and most famous feature of the house had to have been its Playboy pool. It was 12 feet deep, 20 feet wide, 40 feet long, featured the Playboy bunny painted on the bottom, and a giant chandelier looked down upon the whole thing. The pool even featured tunnels that led right into neighboring bedrooms, and it sounds like those tunnels were used extremely regularly. Unfortunately, the party did not last long. About a year later, in 1973, Hull was arrested for hiring someone to kill his wife's lover. That earned him a 20-year prison sentence. While he did not serve the entire thing, he was certainly imprisoned long enough for his mansion to fall into disarray. That, plus his years of imprisonment resulting in bankruptcy, meant that famous pool was to be swam in no longer. In its final years, the Swingers Mansion was an utter wreck, with the Playboy pool absolutely drowning in vulgar graffiti that we could not possibly begin to show you in this video. Just trust us when we say it's absolutely filthy. Or rather, was filthy. That's because in September 2017, 2 years after the city of Chattanooga seized the property due to unpaid taxes, the Swingers Mansion met wrecking ball and was no more. It's one thing for a building to stand for over 100 years. Pidhirtsi Castle in Ukraine, on the other hand, is closing in on 400 years of life. Not bad for a bunch of stones. The castle was built for a Polish military commander named Hetman Stanislaw Konopolski as a combination fortress and living facility. It was built extremely well and remained livable well into the mid-1800s. Unfortunately, that's when new owners took over, and like so many times when management changes hands, things quickly went awry. The new owners neglected their purchase, and it quickly fell into disorder. After World War II, thanks for the unholy trinity of fire, flooding, and neglect, it had deteriorated to the point where it was a small miracle the place still stood at all. Currently, Pidhirtsi Castle is part of the Lviv Art Gallery, whose foundation wishes to raise the funds necessary to fully restore the castle to its original glory. They've not yet been successful, but if you have a couple extra bucks lying around, consider throwing them their way.